Sometimes a man thinks he's buying a way out, but ends up carrying something sacred instead. I remember that morning like it was carved into the land itself, cold wind sweeping down from the ridges, dry earth cracking under worn boots, and a man standing alone at a trading post with the last of his silver. His name was Gideon Rourke, and folks said he used to work iron from the earth till the mine closed, and grief hollowed him out like a canyon. Now he had nothing left but a boy too thin for his age, a cabin held together by mercy and hope, packed tight into the shape of a brown mule with a worn saddle. He didn't know it yet, but that saddle was stitched not just with leather, but with silence, and something breathing inside it. I was standing nearby that day, just a woman selling herbs and coffee, barely noticed by the men with rifles and hard stares. But I saw the way Gideon's hands trembled when he counted those 8 coins. I saw the way Silas, the man selling the mule, kept his eyes low, like even he was afraid of what he was handing over. Said the saddle was special cargo. Told Gideon not to look too close, that some things are better left untouched. But Gideon wasn't the kind of man to leave things buried. Not when a life was calling to him. He named the mule Mercy, though he didn't know yet how fitting that name would become. Because by nightfall, that saddle would open, and inside something would be waiting. Something small, something alive, something that would change the course of 3 lives forever. And in a land where dust buries secrets deep, one man was about to carry the heaviest truth of all, cradled in silence and wrapped in cloth. You wouldn't have looked twice at Gideon Rourke, not back then. He was just a tall man with worn-out boots and too much quiet behind the eyes. Folks said he used to laugh once before the mine collapsed and buried his best friend before the fever took his wife in the dead of winter, before the world stopped making sense and started asking too much. Since then, Gideon lived on the edge of town with his son Caleb in a cabin no bigger than a hayloft and just as drafty. Caleb was 8, smart as a whip, quiet like his pa, but with a gentleness that hadn't yet been crushed by the world. His mother's hands, folks used to say he had her way of touching things like they might break. For weeks they'd been eating thin stew and sleeping with boots on, waiting for the next bad thing to come knocking. That's why Gideon bought the mule. He figured they could ride north before the first snow and find work at one of the lumber camps, maybe catch a new start. All they needed was that animal and the strength to keep going. He led the mule home, slow boots, kicking up dust that clung to the hem of his coat. Caleb met him at the fence, eyes wide and shining for the first time in weeks. "She ours?" the boy asked. "She is," Gideon said. "Thought we might call her Mercy." Caleb smiled so big it hurt to see. "She looks strong. She's all we've got now." That night, after they'd fed the mule and eaten the last of the potatoes, Gideon sat on the porch with a lantern eyeing the saddle. Something about it still felt wrong. It was too heavy, lumpy in the wrong places, not the way a saddle should sit. He ran his hands along the leather calluses, catching on seams that were too well stitched. He unbuckled the straps, checking for damage. That's when he felt it, a warmth. Not the kind from sun, but from something living. He froze, pressed his hand again. Still warm. He leaned close, the lantern light flickering against the cracked surface. Then he heard it, a sound so soft it didn't belong in this world. Not out here. Not in a saddle. Breathing. Careful now, he worked his fingers under a flap stitched into the underside. The thread was tight, the design clever. Whoever hid this meant for it to stay hidden. But Gideon couldn't turn away. Not after everything he'd lost. The flap came loose with a slow pull, and what he saw next didn't make sense at first. A bundle of cloth, a tiny shape, something moving. Then a hand, no bigger than a biscuit, curled at the edge of the cloth. And a face. A baby's face. She was sleeping. Peacefully. Her cheeks were red with warmth, her lips just barely parted. Around her were signs of care: clean rags, a pouch of milk powder wrapped in oiled paper, and a folded letter sealed but unsigned. Gideon's heart stuttered. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the saddle. A baby. Someone had hidden a baby in the saddle, had wrapped her in protection and hope, and handed her off to a stranger like she was nothing more than baggage. Behind him, Caleb's voice cut through the dark. "Pa, you okay?" Gideon scrambled to hide the child, sealing the flap with shaking hands. "Just checking the stitching," he muttered, but his mind was already spiraling. Who hides a child in a saddle? Why sell her like gear? Was she stolen? Was someone out there looking for her? He turned toward Caleb, standing barefoot in the doorway, his too big shirt hanging off his small frame. "You should get some rest," Gideon said. "We leave early." Caleb tilted his head. "There's something in there, ain't there?" Gideon hesitated, long enough for a boy to understand. But Caleb didn't press. He just nodded slowly and said, "I'll get our bags ready." And it was in that quiet moment, watching his boy disappear into the house, without asking why, that Gideon Rourke knew he was holding more than a mystery. He was holding a life. One that didn't belong to him, but might just be the one thing that gave his own life meaning again. He opened the flap once more. The baby's eyes were open now, dark, deep, impossibly calm. She looked at him, and he couldn't look away. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he whispered. The baby made a soft sound, like a breath made of light. And something broke open in Gideon's chest, a place that had been empty since the day his wife left this world. Mercy indeed. But what he didn't know, what none of us knew, was that this child had not been abandoned. She had been hidden, and she was being hunted. That night the wind didn't blow the way it usually did. It held its breath. Gideon lay awake, the saddle beside him on the floor, like a secret too big for any man to carry alone. The baby, still unnamed, slept soundless within it. Even Caleb, curled up on the other side of the hearth, hadn't stirred since supper. But Gideon, he listened. To the wood creaking in the walls, to the mule shifting outside, to something he couldn't name pressing down from the dark beyond the cabin walls. And then he heard it. Hooves, distant at first, then closer, then too many. He rose slow, crossed the cabin in 4 long strides, and lifted the curtain. Across the dry plain just beyond the last rise, a string of torches moved in single file like fireflies with a purpose. Not neighbors, not travelers, riders, armed, organized. He grabbed his coat, then the saddle. "Caleb," he whispered. The boy sat up instantly, trained by hard years to wake without questions. "We're going," Gideon said. The boy's eyes landed on the saddle. "She in there?" Gideon nodded. "And someone's coming for her." They slipped out the back, careful as ghosts. The mule Mercy stirred, but made no noise. She seemed to sense it too, something unnatural in the air. They cut through the scrub behind the cabin, Gideon cradling the saddle like it was filled with dynamite and dreams at the same time. Caleb trotted behind bare feet, silent in the dust. The torches spread wider now. Voices rose sharp and clipped. "Search every room. Take the damn door off its hinges if you have to." The house was no longer a home. It was a trap. Gideon pushed them further into the brush, toward a dry creek bed that twisted around the far edge of the property. They moved until the voices faded into echo, then crouched beneath the overhang of a fallen cottonwood. He opened the flap just enough to check. The baby was still warm, still watching, still trusting. Caleb leaned in close and whispered, "She's not scared." "She don't have the good sense to be," Gideon muttered. From above, the sound of footsteps. Close now, too close. Then a voice, smooth, educated, chilling. "Mr. Rourke, I know you're out here. We just want to talk." Gideon clenched his jaw. That voice didn't belong to some desperate man out to steal a meal. It belonged to a hunter. "You bought something today that wasn't yours to buy," the voice continued. "A piece of property stolen from its rightful family. Return it, and no one has to get hurt." Property. He called her property. The baby stirred, made a soft sound. Caleb instinctively placed his hand over her belly, whispering gently like he did with the sick lambs in spring. The voice called again, calm, measured. "We know you're a good man, Mr. Rourke. A father. A man who understands what it means to protect a child. Help us bring her home." Gideon shook his head. The words were honey, but there was gunpowder underneath. Then from deeper in the woods, a woman's voice. "Don't listen to them. Please, they'll kill her." It was distant but desperate, and real. Gideon froze. Someone else was out here, someone who knew. The voice from above turned sharp. "Shut her up." Then chaos. The riders split, some heading toward the woman, others fanning out wider. The trap was tightening. Gideon turned to Caleb. "Stay hidden. Don't move. Don't make a sound." Caleb nodded, eyes wide but steady. "You going after her?" Gideon gripped the saddle tighter. "I need to know who we're running from. And why?" He handed Caleb the saddle gently. "Hold her like your life depends on it." "It does, don't it?" the boy asked. Gideon gave one tight nod, then slipped into the trees. The woods swallowed him. Every step a whisper on dry leaves, every heartbeat a drumbeat he couldn't silence. He moved toward the voice until he saw her, a young woman crouched behind a boulder dress, torn hands scraped raw. She looked up as he approached, eyes wet with terror and something else, hope. "You have my daughter," she whispered. Gideon hesitated. "The child in the saddle. She yours?" She nodded, nearly sobbing. "Yes. Her name's Lark. Please tell me she's safe." Gideon's throat tightened. "She's safe. For now." She dropped to her knees. "They took my husband. His brother Malcolm, he wants the land. Says Lark's not really James's child. Says I was unfaithful. But he's lying. He killed his own kin to steal the ranch." Gideon's gut twisted. "He'll kill her too," she said, "if he finds her. A dead baby can't inherit." The words hit like a slap of winter wind. Before he could speak, a voice cut through the dark again. "Rebecca, come out now and I might let you live." The name froze in Gideon's spine. Rebecca looked at him. "Please, I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't let him take her." For a moment, Gideon saw her not as a stranger, but as a mother on the edge of losing everything. He held out his hand. "Come on," he said. "We don't run anymore. We fight this together." And from that moment on, they weren't three strangers in the dark. They were a family the world hadn't expected to form, but one that would soon stand between a child and a man willing to kill to erase her from the land. Rebecca Morrison didn't look like a fighter. She looked like a woman who'd been chased to the edge of the world and kept going. Mud streaked her hem. Her hands were scratched raw from running through thorn brush and bramble. But when she reached the fallen oak where Caleb hid with the baby, she moved like a mother born for battle. Caleb's eyes lit up when he saw Gideon return the baby still warm and safe in his arms. "This is her mama?" he asked. Gideon nodded. "We're going to help them." But he held a hand up when Rebecca stepped forward, her eyes welling with the sight of her daughter. "Not yet," he said gently. "We move first. Reunion later." Rebecca bit her lip, nodded once. She understood. Sometimes love meant waiting, especially when danger breathed down your neck. The mule was still tethered near the cabin. Getting to her would mean crossing open ground, exposed and vulnerable. But staying here was worse. Malcolm's men were circling like wolves, and they'd find this hollow soon enough. "When I say run," Gideon said, "you run. straight to that mule. No looking back. "What about you?" she asked, already clutching her daughter close. "Someone has to buy you time." "No." Her voice cracked. "Yes," he said, soft but firm. "You saved her the first time. Now it's my turn." Rebecca's mouth quivered, but she didn't argue. The next seconds passed like held breath. Then, there I see movement. A voice too close. They'd been spotted. "Run," Gideon barked. They exploded from the trees, like deer flushed from brush. Caleb and Rebecca racing across the yard, baby tight against her chest. Gideon stayed behind, stepping into the open, drawing attention like a flare. He heard the boots behind him, the curses, the growl of rage in Malcolm's voice as he shouted, "Where is she, Crane?" "Gone," Gideon said calmly. "She's with the territorial marshal by now. You're too late." It was a lie. A dangerous one. But it was a lie wrapped in truth, a father protecting children. Malcolm stepped from the tree line. There were 4 men at his back, all with rifles drawn. He was younger than Gideon expected, maybe mid-30s, but his eyes were already dead. The kind of eyes that didn't flinch when stealing or killing. The kind of eyes that believed power could erase guilt. "Don't play games with me," Malcolm sneered. "I know you found the baby. I know my dear sister-in-law is close. This can end easy or hard, but it's going to end." "You murdered your own brother," Gideon said flatly. "My brother was a fool," Malcolm snapped. "Married a woman who couldn't even give him a proper heir." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Rebecca crouched behind the barn, now held her daughter tight as they prepared to mount the mule. "She's gone," Gideon repeated. "She's not here." Caleb, brave as ever, stepped into view. "We took her to the marshal this morning," he said, voice steady. "Pa said it wasn't right to keep what wasn't ours, said the law had to decide." Malcolm narrowed his eyes at the boy. For a moment, the predator in him hesitated, calculating, weighing truth against convenience. Then he gave a nod. "Search the house," he ordered. His men scattered, but it was too late. By the time they tore through the cabin and came up empty, Rebecca and the baby were gone, riding hard through the sagebrush trail Gideon had used years before. They had a head start now. Maybe not much, but sometimes in the West, a head start was everything. Later that night, when the men had ridden off, cursing and spitting dust, Gideon sat beside the hearth with Caleb. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. "What's going to happen next?" the boy finally asked. Gideon looked out toward the moonlit trail. "That depends," he said, "on whether the law is faster than greed." 3 days passed, and then hoofbeats, but not the angry thunder of Malcolm's men. This was different, deliberate, steady, purposeful. Out of the dust rode Marshal Tomlin, flanked by 2 deputies. And between them, on that old brown mule, sat Rebecca Morrison, with her daughter cradled in her arms. They had made it. She slid from the saddle, walked straight to Gideon, and said the words like a prayer. "We told him everything. He believed us. He's coming for Malcolm." The marshal confirmed it. "Found blood in the house. A fresh grave behind the barn. A confession letter, too. Seems your brother-in-law decided to run before we got there. But what sealed the case wasn't the letter. It was the birthmark on Baby Lark's shoulder. A small crescent-shaped mark passed down in the Morrison family for 3 generations. James had it, his father before him. And now so did she. Rebecca unwrapped the child gently, revealing the mark. The marshal leaned close, nodded once. "That's blood enough for me," he said. And with that, the land, the inheritance, and the future all belonged to the child who'd once slept inside a saddle. The days that followed should have brought rest, but no one in this. Gideon knew it. Caleb knew it. Even Rebecca knew it, though she tried to hide the tremble in her hands as she mended the baby's blanket. The marshal had given them hope. But Malcolm Nash hadn't been caught. And a man like that doesn't vanish. He waits. He plots. So Gideon and Caleb packed quiet, careful. Rebecca would stay at the marshal's outpost a few more days, make her statement official. Then she and Lark would return to the Morrison Ranch with papers with law on the schn. But law is only as strong as the hands that carry it. And Malcolm had never cared Mo. It happened just as the sun dipped low over the edge. Hoofbeats again this time, not steady. A shout from the ridge. They're here. Gideon stepped out with his hands raised calm as he could and met Malcolm face to face once more. The outlaw dismounted slow every move smug Lou. Well now, Malcolm said. What a surprise. Still play. You came all this way just to talk. Oh, I ain't here to talk. Malcolm's grin faded. I'm here to collect what's mine. There's nothing here for you, Gideon said. Rebecca's under protection. The baby's been claimed. Malcolm step. That baby's not my brother's. She's a lie just like her mama. And I ain't about to let some bastard child steal the land I bled for. You murdered James, Gideon said flatly. And Malcolm said, only crime I made was not finishing the job the first time. Gideon didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He just took one long breath and looked to his son, who was watching from the doorway. Get ready to run, he told him, and take the long trail east, the one through the creek bed. You remember? Caleb didn't move. I'm not leaving you, Pa. Yes, Gideon said, you are. He turned to Malcolm. You came for a baby. She's not here. You're too late. But Malcolm only smiled. Then I'll wait. She'll come back sooner or later. And when she does, I'll take what's mine one way or another. He turned to leave, then paused. You're a fool, Rourke. You risked your life for a woman you barely knew and a child who ain't yours. You think that makes you a hero? Gideon stared back, eyes like stone. No, I think it makes me a man. That night, Caleb crept outside and sat beside his father on the porch. Was it worth it? He asked. Lying to him, standing up like that. Gideon looked up at the stars. Sometimes a man's got to draw a line in the dirt and say, this far. No further. Even if no one else sees it. He paused. Even if it gets him killed. Caleb was quiet for a while. Then in a soft voice, he asked, do you think I did the right thing lying to protect her? Gideon looked at him, really looked. Son, you didn't lie to protect her. You lied to protect what's right. That's not the same thing. The next morning, Malcolm and his men were gone. But in their place, a message had been carved into the door of the cabin. You can't hide her forever. Rebecca returned the next day. Her eyes read the carving before her mouth did. He's not finished, she said. No, Gideon agreed, but neither are we. That night they made a decision one none of them spoke aloud, but all understood. They wouldn't run. They would rebuild. They would wait. And when the time came, they'd fight. Because justice hadn't been fully delivered yet. And because somewhere out there in the dark, Malcolm Nash was still hunting a baby who carried the mark of a name he'd tried to bury. But Lark wasn't alone anymore. She had a mother. She had a brother in Caleb. And she had a man like Gideon Rourke standing in front of her, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And in the West, the people you choose to protect, they become the people you belong to. It happened just before dawn, when the world is still holding its breath and even the coyotes go quiet. Gideon had been awake for hours, boots laced, rifle across his knees, watching the tree line. He knew what silence meant out here. Not peace, preparation. Rebecca stirred behind him. Lark sleeping on her chest, the baby's soft breath rising and falling against a rhythm of fear too old to name. Caleb was crouched near the back wall, just like they'd practiced with a sack of supplies, and a second pair of boots tied together, ready to run, if it came to that. And it would. Gideon saw the first flicker of torchlight just after the wind shifted. Then shadows, tall-armed, slow-moving. Malcolm had returned, but not with fury this time. With precision, they spread wide, flanking both sides of the cabin. Gideon counted 6 men, then 7, then 8. One of them, he noticed, carried no weapon, just a roll of paper tucked under his arm. Legal documents. He's making it look clean, Gideon muttered. He's not just here to kill, he's here to win on paper. Sure enough, Malcolm's voice rang out from beyond the porch. Rourke, step outside. No need for this to get ugly. Gideon didn't move. You've been harboring fugitives, Malcolm continued. You lied to the law. You helped a mentally unwell woman steal property and pass off a bastard child as legitimate blood. Rebecca's breath caught. The words weren't just an accusation, they were strategy. I have statements from 2 witnesses, Malcolm shouted. Sworn affidavits. One says he saw Rebecca Morrison with another man during her marriage. The other says James was infertile. You think a marshal's gonna fight all that for a child with no name? Gideon stepped forward, rifle in hand, but held low. She has a name, he said. Her name's Lark, and she's more Morrison than you'll ever be. Malcolm emerged from the dark, expression smug. Let's see what the court says. I'll have her back by sundown. No, Gideon replied. And before Malcolm could respond, something moved at the edge of the woods. A rider, then 2, then 5. From out of the shadow came Marshal Tomlin and his deputies, riding hard, silent and swift dust, kicking up behind them like thunder rolling down from heaven. Malcolm froze. Tomlin dismounted in a single-motion boots, landing like judgment. You never were subtle, were you? The marshal said coldly. Malcolm recovered quickly, straightening his coat. Marshal, I was just reclaiming stolen family property. I have legals. Tomlin held up a folded paper. You mean this? He flicked it open. Your signed confession. You left it behind when you ran. I also have the doctor's letter confirming the birthmark. And the town blacksmith just swore under oath that you threatened to kill your brother over land rights 2 years ago. Malcolm's mouth opened, but no words came. Rebecca stepped out onto the porch, baby in her arms. We're not hiding anymore, she said, voice calm, though her hands trembled. Gideon walked beside her. And we're not running. The men around Malcolm shifted. Their leader was no longer a man, they saw it now. He was a fraud wrapped in rage, and the weight of truth was breaking his mask apart. You'll still lose in court, Malcolm shouted. She's not legitimate. Tomlin turned to his deputies. Take him. They moved forward, weapons drawn. Malcolm reached for his pistol, but Gideon was faster. One shot. Not a kill, but a reminder. The bullet hit Malcolm's shoulder, spinning him backward into the dust. He lay there groaning, clutching the wound. Pride shattered the silence of his men, louder than any gunfire. Tomlin stepped over him, eyes like cold steel. You'll hang for what you did. Not just murder, but cowardice. Later that morning, as the sun burned away the last of the chill, Gideon stood at the fence line, watching the wind carry dust over the trail. Behind him, Rebecca sat in a rocking chair, holding Lark, while Caleb read a book beside her. Everything was quiet now. Not empty quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over land that's been defended, that's been made sacred again by truth. Rebecca rose and walked to Gideon, placing a hand on his arm. I don't know how to repay you, she said. You already did, he replied. You trusted me when the world didn't give you any reason to. She smiled softly. You could stay, you know. The ranch, it's too much for one person. Lark's going to need more than just me. He looked at her, at Caleb, at the porch where the baby now cooed at a butterfly passing through sunlight. Maybe it's time, he said, to stop carrying ghosts and start raising something that matters. And in that moment, there was no need for ceremony. No grand speech, just the quiet promise of something new. A future not born from blood, but from choice. And that out here in the West was the only kind of family that ever truly lasted. There are moments in life that don't feel loud. They don't come with fanfare or applause. They arrive in quiet ways, like the soft rustle of a baby's breath against your shirt or the sound of a boy's laugh returning after being gone too long. For Gideon Rourke, that moment came one afternoon as he watched Caleb teaching baby Lark how to hold a wooden spoon. The girl, barely walking, was giggling, her dark curls bouncing in the wind, while the boy carefully guided her hand like he was passing on something sacred. Rebecca stood nearby, watching them both flower on her cheek sleeves rolled. The kitchen was too small, the ranch too old, the world still uncertain, but it was home, and not the kind you're born into, the kind you choose. Later that night, Gideon sat on the porch beneath a sky that had seen too much. He traced the stars with his eyes, remembering the first time he held Lark in that saddle. Back when he thought he was just buying a mule. Back when he believed he didn't deserve more than survival. But that's the thing about the West. And maybe about life too. Sometimes the thing you think is a burden ends up being the reason you live again. In a world that often tells us to protect what's ours, this story reminds us of something deeper. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the ones you choose to stand beside when no one else would. Gideon didn't save Lark because he had to. He did it because something inside him remembered what it felt like to be lost, and chose instead to become a place someone else could be found. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not fixing what's broken, but loving through it anyway. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you once protected, or someone who chose you when they didn't have to, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and share the moment that made you feel found. And if you believe in stories that heal, that remind us what matters, please consider subscribing to Wild West Soul. There's a reason these stories are still whispered under starlight, because some truths don't fade with time. They ride with us all the way home.